In this video, we will show you how to replace your power steering pressure line on this Honda Civic. This will be located under your vehicle. Let's get into it. Okay friends, let's get started on our job. First, you want to safely make your way underneath the vehicle. The power steering line that we will be replacing is located just above your subframe. Now to start replacing this power steering line, we'll start by disconnecting this electrical connector. On these, typically you just want to squeeze on the locking tab and then lift it up and out of position. Give it a quick check for corrosion and we can set this aside. Now let's make our way up to where there's a bracket that mounts directly to our plastic intake. We'll be using a 10mm to remove that bolt. Now let's make our way down towards that subframe. We'll be following the power steering line, and you're going to find right behind this other power steering line, there's a small 10mm bolt holding the power steering line in place. We'll remove that bolt as well. At this point, we'll continue on to where the line connects to the power steering rack. Now looking along the backside of this subframe is where you're going to find where that line goes into. It's a little bit easier to access from the front of the subframe, so let's make our way over there. Now, as you can see from the front of the subframe, you have a lot more room to be able to work. Here's where the line goes into the power steering rack. Of course, you could use your 21mm wrench and try to loosen this, but you won't have very much room due to this hose right here. So what we will do is come right up to where that connects to the power steering rack, loosen that clamp enough that we can remove the hose, and then we can work on this line. But before you start taking it apart, keep in mind that there is fluid inside of the power steering system. You want to make sure you have a collection bucket under this area and make sure that you divert the hose down into that bucket as you continue. Now we'll start removing our hose from up here. Typically these will be held in place with some sort of clamp. You just want to loosen that and slide the hose up and off of the end on the rack. As we're taking this off, we'll be careful not to break the hose. Commonly you might want to grab onto it, give it a little twist. See if it is freed up. If you can't pull it off of there, you can try using a pry bar. Just don't damage the hose. We'll continue on with our 21mm wrench. At this point, you can get right on this fitting. We'll be turning it counterclockwise to remove it from the power steering rack. Now I'll make my way along the backside, take hold of that power steering line, and we'll start bringing it down so we can drain that into our collection bucket as well. Let's continue on back along the backside of that subframe. Once again, we'll be following the power steering hose to where it connects to the power steering pump. You can see it up along this area. It's held in place with two 10mm headed bolts. We'll remove the top one, it's a little harder to get to, and then we'll do this one and pop that line right off of there. Keep in mind there could be fluid in this area as well. It's best to have a second collection bucket. Now we'll take hold of that line and remove it from the vehicle. Drain as much fluid out of the lines as possible before we continue. Now we'll continue on by removing the pressure sensor. Looking at the line, you're going to find an area that you can hold onto with a 17mm wrench or a vise if you've got one. Aside from that, for the sensor itself, you can also use a 17mm. We'll hold the line still with one and use the other wrench to loosen the sensor. Let's transfer that over to the brand new line. You know exactly where it needs to go, right into that fitting. We'll start this in by hand and bottom it out. Once you've done that, you can take hold of the line with a 17mm wrench and tighten the sensor. Now we can remove each of our two brackets from the line. To do that, you'd want to separate these two ears and carefully pull it off. You don't want to bend it too far, just enough to get it over the line. You can use your fingers if you can, or some pliers. We'll give it a quick inspection, do the same to the other one real quick. This one's a little easier, more leverage. Now we can transfer these over to the brand new line. Just press that into place. Pin this over, try to align those mounting bolt holes as close as possible. We'll continue on and do the same thing to the other bracket. Once again, we'll be trying to align those two mounting bolt holes. Once you have, you can get this back over to the vehicle. Now we can get ready to install our power steering line. I'm going to use a little bit of power steering fluid right on the O-ring. That'll help it slip into place. Take that power steering line, we're going to form an upside down U and start bringing it up into position, starting with the power steering pump. With that on there, let's continue on with those two 10mm headed bolts. We'll start them in by hand, making sure that we do not cross thread them and snug them up. With those snug, we'll torque them to 96 inch-pounds. Now we can get that power steering pressure line in place, coming across the top of the subframe, over the other line, all the way over to that power steering rack. There we go. Once you feel as though you have the line in the proper placement, we'll continue on with putting it into the power steering rack. Now I'll continue on with tightening this using an 18mm. I want to make sure it's nice and snug so it does not leak on you while you're driving down the road. Now we can take this other hose, we'll put it in place, put the clamp on there, and make sure we clamp that nice and tight as well. Now let's continue on to the lower bracket. We'll be using the smaller 10mm headed bolt. We'll try to get this bracket aligned properly with the subframe. Start that bolt in by hand, of course, and then snug it up. Now let's move along to the bracket that holds the line to the plastic intake. Once you have that lined up, go ahead and start in that mounting bolt. Let's reconnect the wiring for that pressure sensor. Press it in, listen for a click, give it a tug to make sure that is secured. Now we can make our way out from underneath the vehicle. Under the hood on the passenger side is where you'll find your power steering reservoir. We'll remove that cap. Continue on with adding power steering fluid. Keep in mind there will be a lot of air in the system. More than likely it'll take approximately 2 pints. I'll use a rag right around this area in case I spill any. I want to make sure I have that ready. And now we'll add the manufacturer specified power steering fluid. Now we'll hop inside the passenger compartment. We are going to put the key in the on position and turn that steering wheel all the way to one side and then all the way to the other. We'll be repeating this process several times to try to burp out any air from inside of that power steering system. Now once we've done that, we can start up the vehicle. We're going to let it run for approximately 5 seconds and turn it right back off. We'll make our way back out here and double check that fluid level. It's common for it to be a little low at this point. We'll top it off up to that maximum line. After you've done that, you can put the cap back in position and take your vehicle for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.